Jacques, wonderful finally to hear someone optimistic about the future of work.
It's Friday.
But Michael, I'm going to toss you into the hot seat first and potentially pit you against your boss, because I heard your MD, Andrew Bassett, speaking in Queensland a little while ago, and Andrew wasn't nearly as optimistic. Andrew's view was that the jobs are going and probably not coming back, and that Australia as a country is perilously placed because of complacency. So both your own views and the data, what does SEEK show?
Thanks, Rob. Yes, I tend to argue with my boss a bit, and we're pretty open about it. I'm not quite as pessimistic as Andrew, but I'm definitely not as optimistic as Jacques. And I think the one that I'm a bit worried about is that second one, that 3-to-1 ratio in terms of for all jobs lost, a third of it being recreated directly. But then I guess the leap of faith is, are there 2/3 of those indirect roles actually going to be created or not, and are they going to be created? Here is the question. In terms of what our data is already showing, is there is already quite a transition happening in the Australian economy. The two big things that we're seeing is, one, there is an ongoing, slow, it's not off the cliff, but there is an ongoing shift away from permanent full-time work, and we've seen it on our platform over the past 6 or 7 years. We've had probably about a 70% increase in the relative amount of part-time or non-full-time roles compared to full-time roles. So it's gone from around 18% of all of our roles advertised were non-full-time. Now it's about 32%. That's over about 6 or 7 years. So it's an increase. It's 2% a year increase. So that is clearly happening, that casualisation. The second thing, when we look across...
Actually, can I jump in and say part-time is different from casualised work, and we're not seeing an increase in casualised work, at least in the Australian Bureau of Statistics labour force survey. So maybe part-time work is a sign we're working more flexibly, but not necessarily that we're not able to find work.
To be honest, our data tends to not agree with a lot of the ABS labour force statistics data. No, it really doesn't. Yeah.
Game on.
We do tend to disagree with that survey quite a bit. Anyway, that's about as much as
you
we say.
yourself were talking about part-time work, and I just think that's an important distinction.
Yeah, sorry. So to be crystal clear, non-full-time. So between full-time and non-full-time roles have gone up 60 to 70%. There's clearly some of that's by choice. So there's a big increase in high-value contractors where it's the employee driving that. But there's also a large increase in casual, lower skilled roles, which is clearly pushed the other way.
And Michael, what jobs are disappearing?
There's quite a few where we're sort of surprised to see them going down. I was using the example of mortgage processing and a lot of those roles that have been offshore. But if we look broadly across the Australian economy, right now is actually really good. In general, we've got the most opportunities that we've had on site for 6 or 7 years. All of our metrics are high, but there's still some industries that are shrinking. Banking and finance has been decreasing for the past couple of years. Admin and office support roles are decreasing in terms of both the type of roles and the applications per hour are off the charts when you advertise for something like that. And advertising, arts and the media, particularly the media, is also really struggling at the moment.
Thanks, Michael. I'm conscious that these debates can turn into talk fests, and they're lovely to listen to, but when you walk out of the room, there's not really anything you can take away and apply back in your own lives and your own workplaces. So I'm really conscious that we can walk away with some takeaways for our own lives today. And so starting with you, Jan, you're on the board of one of the organisations in the room. You've heard the debates, both sides, on the future of work and the impact of artificial intelligence and technology. What input are you going to have at the board level, and what initiatives are you going to require the companies to take to better prepare themselves?
I actually got confused and I thought, which board am I on in the room?
Any board, you pick a board.
That's right. Well, listen, I think there's a couple of things that from our perspective and the work that we've done at any rate, is that and we've gone straight to kind of, what is a 15-year-old? There'll be a few people in the room with 15-year-olds or coming up to 15-year-olds. What's a 15-year-old going to be doing in the future of work? And our research is really focused on not so much let's debate about what's going to happen, but we've already been told that it's changing and we've got many data points to change. And so what is the most important thing that we need to do to prepare, equip, and I would say actually inspire people about kind of a very different future? And so for us, this comes down to who and how are you going to attract talent? How are you as a parent going to engage, or an aunt or an uncle or a godparent going to engage in actually the most essential anchor to that preparing young people right now in this country is still an education system that I would say is actually still stuck in the kind of 20th century. So, at every measure, there are, of course, brilliant points of light, and there are some great schools, mostly schools with lots of resources, who are doing great things. But across the board, can we hand on heart say, in a country like Australia, that we are absolutely preparing 4.3 million young Australians for this future, and looking at a future that, remember, will see a rapidly ageing population and a decrease of the taxpayer base, unless we change our view about immigration, which is, of course, the topic of another CEDA event. So this is a very, very critical time for us to think about future generations back at the school level, back in education, and then what are we bringing through to our organisations, and how are we attracting, retaining, and also growing that talent. So if there's one message that's come through our research, it's you can forget about the dream job, you can forget about the ladder, and you can start thinking about jungle gyms, and you can start thinking about upskilling and retraining throughout your life. Now, for some people, that's incredibly exciting. It's like, oh my God, my employer is probably going to help me do that, and that would be a phenomenal person to work for. But for other people, that is just like white-hot fear. Like, what does that mean, and what are the risks in that, and will I be in and out of work, and how will I maintain my role and my place, and so on. So there are so many things for the board to talk with management about people. How are you preparing, skilling, and do you know the skills? And Jacques had a list, but there's a broad list of what are the skills and capabilities. And our recent report said that we expect by 2030, people will spend almost 100% more time than they do at work in your job today on problem solving. And that problem solving is not about what's going on with my tech, it's about what's going on with people. How am I dealing with problems with people and customers and people in my organisation?
And as to your point, Jacques, didn't I read in that report a 41% increase in the need for high-level skills in written communication?
Written communication, problem solving, this idea that also you're going to be self-directed. If you start to see middle management being stripped out of a lot of organisations, then people are going to manage themselves. And of course, we also very clearly, and this is actually out of McKinsey work, 17 jobs in 5 different industries for a 15-year-old today, but also to the flexible piece, sometime working for someone else, sometime working for yourself, sometime working with others. And the best things that I see young people doing today, actually they're already doing all of that. So you talk to an average uni student, they're already working for someone else, they're already in a startup with their friends, and they're doing uni and trying to think about what else they want to do. But they're the ones that are motivated, have got the skills and got the support and got the network to actually do that and go after those opportunities.
So to summarise, if you're on the board, you're reviewing the recruitment practices, you're reviewing the skills matrix, and you're seeing whether HR is on top of the skills we need for tomorrow, and are we recruiting for those skills, and is our learning and development function keeping up?
Yeah, I think so. And the one thing I would say is that the chronology of a young person who comes with, here's my list of things I've done, and lots of employers are very stressed about that. They're, why have you had a year here, and 2 years there? I would actually say there's a very different view on that for us now and into the future, which is, can we track the skills and capabilities that you have honed, developed, and grown through multiple experiences? And that is as important as a chronology of where you worked, for how long, and with whom. And that is a very, very, I would beg boards to think about, or management, not boards, to think about the portability and to look at skills and capabilities and a journey of development of those, not at how many jobs I've been to and how long I spent there.
Thanks, Jo. Claire, you're on the board.
I'm looking forward to the better pay that gets me. So I am in total agreement with everything that has been said so far about the kinds of skills that will be needed into the future. We have been drawing upon the outdated ABS statistics, but at least they provide coverage of the Australian population, and we've linked that to some incredibly rich data that came out of the US Department of Labor called ONET, where they had human resources managers across all the different sectors rate what skills and domain knowledge were needed in each of the occupations they managed. So we can take that detailed information about what skills are needed in a job and match that to more than 300 of the occupations in the Australian workforce. And then we look at, over time, how the composition of the Australian workforce is changing, and we can see from that how the demand for skills has been changing over time. And there is a very straightforward answer. Higher level skills and communication skills growing faster than STEM skills or technical skills. So STEM skills are important, but it's not the coding. Coding is vital for some very highly skilled professional workers. What we all need to be able to do is to work with technology to solve problems, to innovate, to improve our own lives and that of the business's customers. So we need that, but above all, we're working with the machine. And so we need to bring our human capability to the workplace. And so we need active listening skills, we need negotiation skills, we need empathy and understanding. So what I would say is we have to ensure that our skills investment and our career development efforts within organisations are being directed towards the jobs that will be enhanced by technology rather than the jobs that will be displaced by technology. And we can make some good predictions about which jobs are which. So we need to make sure that we're preparing people for the future opportunities rather than being stuck with what we know.
Thanks, Jen. Jacques?
I want to go back to your statement, which is, I'm not necessarily an optimist. I'm just saying that the future has to be shaped. I don't know. I cannot predict. I cannot tell you what in 2030 the type of skills we will be needed. I've got a tendency to say yes to what you have said, but it's very uncertain what's going to happen. But I know that the future can be shaped, and the point I'm making is that if we shape it right, I don't think we will have a problem. So the problem is to manage more than the problem of saying, look, a problem will occur. So what's the management way of doing it? And I will just give you 3 small ways of doing it, very practical, and they seem to work. So the very first one is that, again, it's not about technical skills. You have made the point. Again, today, if you look at the ICT industry, as a way to look at that, is 4% of the jobs at best. 96% of the jobs are somewhere else. So even if you double that or you triple that, you still have the problem. So you need something else. But coding itself, as a consequence, today, with machine learning, with new language, it's very high-level, playful language. And in Belgium, when I make that anecdote because it's very important one to get from the emotion of it, when we had the first bombing in Brussels, obviously with the turmoil, Brussels is a city where 50% of the inhabitants are actually coming out of Belgium, and not only from the European Commission, but much more from the Maghreb. So you can imagine the stress of everyone in the streets because you were looking at your neighbor and you say, look, this person is driving a taxi, he's from the Maghreb, I will not take that taxi because I never know what's going to happen. And the local government directly reacted by opening a high-level coding school for 50 years old taxi men, meaning people who are actually not Belgian. And in fact, that school was filled in more than 3 days. And all these people with no skill at all in PC, in coding and the like, learn to code by playing to code. And in fact, these guys today have all found a job in enterprise after less than 6 months. When you ask them what they think about the job, they say it's fantastic. When you ask their colleagues what they think about them in the job, people say they are the best rated individuals. I was looking for this kind of individuals. So again, the mindset here is that sometimes when a big problem happens, we find solution. And I think we need a culture of experimentation. That's the first point. Let's not go and saying it's too difficult. Let's make sure that we experiment and learn from experiments. That's point number 1. Point number 2 in terms of the mindset is also, let's redefine and let's go back to our orthodoxies. We have a lot of orthodoxies because we're so good in what we do that we don't go back to the assumptions we make. And I give you, again, an example. I was with the federation of, with the unions. And the unions had this problem, my problem as a union, as the person was telling me, was that I have not enough members anymore. It's shrinking. And I'm like, yeah. And with this future of work, it's going to be even worse. So these guys were actually worried. And I said, look, here's an interesting example. Go this month, September, go to Silicon Valley. And you don't go to Silicon Valley for coding. You go because it's the time that you harvest wine. And at that time, you know how wine are harvested. You need people. And usually the model was very simple. These people were unionized or not. And most of the time they're not unionized. They are on the street. They're just waiting for a truck to pass. And maybe the truck will say, yeah, come in. Did this work for you, yes or no? Well, the new model is not to be unionized. In fact, these people basically created the app. And that mobile app actually makes sure that all the people who want to work that day basically bundle their capacity of working to make sure that they can harvest the field all together in one day with better security of job, better wage negotiation, and something filled correctly. It's a different business model of unionization, but it's actually, worker-centric and not union-centric. So these models can work as well for skills and how do you exchange skills, how do you play with skills and the like. There are just tons of models we can invent, but again, experimentation. And point number 3, as an example, I think we should at least look at that, is that we should think of the problem not as a shaping problem, but as an allocation problem, and draw the consequence of all what we say. If skill change, it's because we're going to need different type of people. We're going to need different type, and certain sectors will disappear, but also certain, why? Because of AI. So one of the sectors that will basically be much more effective because of AI is healthcare. Because in healthcare, you can basically use AI to enable your diagnosis and actually say, look, is it enough for you to go to the hospital, yes or no? I mean, those tools will actually be much more effective. And by the way, if you look at that, that's possibly 5-6% of GDP that you can unleash because it will not be wasted in actually actions that actually today don't help anyone. That 5-6% of GDP, it's a huge amount of money where we can do new global labor exchange platforms or whatever else. So again, this is the thing that France, with the new president, is trying to implement, experiment with that and say, I draw the consequence. The consequence is that nobody will stay at the hospital for 5 days. It's going to be 3 days, like in Sweden. And by the way, before you go to the hospital and want to be financed, I want to make sure you go to the filter of an AI tool to make sure it's actually deserved for you to go to the hospital. No, it's, again, a pilot. But that pilot will likely give you a lot of the insight as to how much money is wasted and how much of that money can be tried out for something else, for new social security system, for new types of jobs and the like. So again, my point is experimentation, allocation, and don't go on the premise that what you see is exactly the truth. Re-experiment or re-innovate the business model.
So sacred cows make the best burgers. And so if you're on the board of my company, I'm hearing that you're going to challenge all of the assumptions underpinning the business, challenge the mindset of the directors around the table, and you're going to encourage experiments to see what the real data shows.
Yes.
Thank you. Michael, you're on the board of any of the companies in the room. You want to prepare them better for the future of work. You've got the floor. What are you going to say to the board?
Well, I think to pick up the conversation on the skills, which is an area that I really agree with, in terms of, we see a lot of our organisations a lot of our clients that are shedding staff in one area, but then have skill shortages in the other. And the reality is, for us as organisation, for almost all organisations in Australia, as much as we talk about training our staff, in reality we outsource the training of our staff to the state-based education institutions. And I think that's the opportunity to change. A lot of people feel a bunch of the skills that are needed in the future have to be 3 or 4 or 5 year education courses, and they don't. There's a lot of this evidence that people are very capable if you can find them the right sort of training and give them these trainings. There's coal miners in the US who have been taught how to code, and all these sorts of examples. So the step change in minds in in mindset, I think, for organisations. Are we going to take responsibility for those individuals that are being displaced? So if we've got calls, we don't need as many call centre workers because we've got great AI filters, but we've got shortage in developers. Are we going to take the responsibility to retrain those call centre people to actually code, or are we effectively going to push them out on the street, leave it to the state-based education institutions and hope that it fills the gap? I think that's the big change when you talk about what can we do, is do we as leaders actively facilitate in helping our people, or do we kind of leave it and hope the market clears? And I think that will be a dramatic change, because that just doesn't, in general, with exceptions, in general, that doesn't occur today. And I feel that organisations who want to take control of their skills and their skills matrices, that's a big step change that could still occur.
But I do think the kind of data that organisations such as yours have, that kind of big data, can begin to give individuals insight into those pathways. And I think it's that sense of knowing it's actually not that hard for me to make the transition. I've got 4 out of the 5 skills I need for the new job will be really important. And so we are beginning to invest in building a national skills taxonomy. And I think a piece that can go with that is the idea of something like a digital educational passport, because our education system has been designed around the idea you do all your training at the start of your career and then you just work. If we're transitioning, we don't need to be necessarily investing in a whole qualification again. What we need is much more just-in-time training to add the 5th skill that redeploys you. And so if we can have a digital educational passport that begins to track over time that training activity, that matches up to big data, can tell you what path you're halfway, 3/4 of the way there too, and over time clocks up a new qualification and shows that you've achieved a higher level of skills. So digital's part of the solution as well as part of the challenge.
And I completely agree, and I think the challenge is then usually these conversations go, and the government should do it, or that university should do it. And I think the change needs to be, no, the employers have to drive that, because on their own, the government won't do it. On their own, the universities are unlikely to do it. But if you can actually work together with them, then we've got the potential.
And can I be slightly provocative? If I was in many of the workplaces I see, and I was a younger person lower down the food chain in the organisation, if I was following the leaders of the company around with a video camera, what example would I see them setting? Because leadership starts at the top.
Yes.
So, stunned silence.
Again, I think we have a segmentation problem. If we look at the data, the problem is that a lot of people are out of job. We have a difficulty to get the skills, get engaged in digital and the like, that we have to help, because these are the first people that will be on the line if they have a job today, or maybe they're already out of job. And then there is a second problem, which is the problem that we're discussing about self-employment and the like, which is very surprising to us because there the market is actually on the supply side, where the bargaining is on the supply side, i.e. young kids, talented kids don't care about a full-time job. They want multiple jobs. They don't care about firms. And when we ask them, 50% of these people are telling us, do you like your job? They say no. Do you like the firm that you work with? The answer is no, 50%. So in fact, we have a problem of labor demand, but we have a problem of labor supply that actually are overqualified, and they believe the model of working with firms is actually not the best model. So we're going to start to see more self-employment because people find it a better alternative. They don't care about security. They care about accomplishment, not security, which is a very different model. So that model is actually going to be eased by digital and by talent matching and possibly, self-employment. And then there is a second problem, which are pretty much middle-age, mid-skill, likely too much asset-specific skills because they've been working in one industry for the same company for 20, 30 years. And that's also where we have to find the issue. And there, I think, I go back to my point of experimentation. We should not have experimentation that fits everyone. We should have experimentation that looks at specific segments where the issue lies. And there, again, my example of the coding for this taxi man show that it can be done. Now, is it scalable? I don't know. But we have to find more of those experiments. And today, we don't. We have a lot of the rest, which on average works the problem is not the average, it's actually that queue of the distribution. We're going to create the social unrest that we don't want to have.
Which is what I was talking with Claire earlier. Which is what our data is showing us already, and we can see this is real change that's already occurred. Is the distribution of wages in our economy is moving. So where it used to be a nice kind of bell curve with a slight distribution to the right, that distribution is shifting. So there are more higher skilled and higher paid roles, but there are also more lower skilled, or not lower skilled, but lower paid roles. And that nice middle class, which is the bedrock of a stable society, is reducing. And so not only is it an economic issue, there's also a societal issue that we're seeing this change in distribution actively occurring already.
Jan, I recall in our conversation on the phone this week, you had a couple of good examples of companies that were addressing these issues well. I think you might have mentioned what PwC was doing, and it's taking a different approach to its graduate recruitment.
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, it's two things that tie in from what Jacques said. CEDA did some big global research, and there were two insights about the up-and-coming kind of group of young people. 69% said that they would love the opportunity to start their own thing, their own business, which was profound. I mean, 20 years ago, it would never have been that high. So that's very high around entrepreneurship. And then about another 78% that said that they saw their best opportunity to find out what they wanted to do and what they could do was in internships. I hesitate to add the word paid after that because we're not in America, we're in Australia. Internships and apprenticeships. And that's super interesting because we've got the lowest apprenticeship rate ever in Australia at the moment, probably in 30 or 40 years. But what PwC has done, which I think is very interesting, is they have brought in a model from the UK called higher apprenticeships, which is going to enable young people to go from school, not having to go through university in 1 or 2 degrees to get to PwC, which has been the norm, but actually have an apprenticeship where they're trained on the job and then going and getting some of these modularised, credentialised work theory as they're learning. And so higher apprenticeships are a really, really interesting model for organisations to think differently about, really, do we really need, I don't know, in real estate, somebody to have a Bachelor of Arts or a Master's in real estate? Now, I'm not saying that real estate isn't hard. It's really hard. But I'm just saying there are many, the real estate table's like going to throw darts at me in a minute. There are many, and you guys, you know, it's amazing what you do. There are many, particularly if you're the vendor. But it is genuinely amazing how many, and I can talk to teaching as well, actually, and nursing, how many professions over a period of one generation have been transformed from learning, apprenticeship-based learning on the job, and actually much lower cost, because remember, every young person in Australia on average leaves university with a $25,000 debt on average. And that there are many ways and many paths now coming and being recreated and being rethought around many professions that have become very professionalised at a very high end through universities over the last couple of decades.
But can I jump in there and say there's a digital solution for that too?
Yes,
because
I know.
What digital platforms do is match the need with the solution. And so there's Paddle, which is providing casual work experience, paid casual work experience for students in the industry area that they want to work into. There's Hatch, which is providing a platform whereby you become employed by them and then become the contingent workforce for a range of different organisations. So this is fantastic because you're getting more informed career choices for the students, they're earning money, and they're learning so much better if they understand the environment they're going to be applying what they're learning in. Absolutely. So I think that's a fantastic part of the solution.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks, Claire. At this juncture, I'm happy to pass over to the floor. If you have questions, please raise your hand, state your name and where you're from. The microphone will come around, I think. Is that right, Esther?
Hi, my name is Bea. I'm from the State Revenue Office, Victoria. So not quite real estate, but got a lot to do with it.
I'm listening.
I suppose I'm wondering, early on in the conversation, there was a lot of talk about how important communications and human skills are, rather than the STEM skills. But I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on how important it is to have both? Because I suppose you can be a great communicator and a great manager, but if you don't understand a lot of the underlying technology, how successful are you going to be?
I totally agree. So we broke down the skill sets into 3 categories: communication skills, STEM skills, and technology. But within that, there are much smaller subsets of skills. So for example, numeracy skills, still incredibly important because the input and the output of digital technology still takes words and numbers. So you don't need programming skills for everyone, although it does give you the basic logic of technology. What you do need is the confidence and the willingness to use technology in your context to solve a problem or to innovate. So coding, not so much, not for a lot of people, but understanding data and how to apply technology, incredibly important. But even more important is that you can back it up with the communication skills to deal with your human customer.
Do we have any more questions?
Can I just re-emphasise that only because, one of the scores that we've had, because Australian schools and students are judged internationally, and one of the scores that we've been poor on in recent years is about our capability around not using, because we are brilliant users and early adopters in this country of all things tech, but actually the ability to kind of make it, break it, build it, rebuild it, make it, break it, which CSIRO are so good at, breaking it. And that is actually where we're falling down. And so to the extent that things like coding or whatever it is gives people confidence to go into that arena is incredibly important. I don't think coding is everything either, but I think the fact that we are certainly seeing that many skills have, many jobs have digital skills in some form is very, very important for us to keep front of mind, and that there are some underlying skills towards that need to be developed.
Esther, do we have any more questions from the floor? If not, I've got a whole list here. Guys,
There is still one elephant in the room that there's one elephant in the room which we have possibly missed, which is, again, 90% of the jobs are still within firm. Maybe it will change to 60, 70, whatever it is in 10, 15 years because of all these new kids being entrepreneur and the like. But at the end of the day, this 90% means that we need competitive companies. And the data are extremely strong. The companies that are innovative, that are possibly early movers, will be the one to churn jobs, but will be the ones that's going to rehire a lot more. And the effect is actually positive. And so the point here is also how much of industrial policy do we still have to get at the government level for Australia to make sure that we got 2 or 3 sectors we really want to thrive globally, and 2, how much of companies are really trying to be innovative and redesign product, services, and the like to be competitive on the world markets. And I guess that's also something that we keep missing, which is the responsibility of firms to be innovative. And the second point, which is the elephant of the room, before with digital, it's all about the chief digital officer. Then it moved to the chief data officer for your data. Maybe it's time to think about the HR as back in track as the key skills to have, and matching the life learning with firms and the like too. So I think these 2 core capabilities, competitiveness, innovativeness of firms, and having an HR, which is strategic HR and talent management, is 2 things that we keep missing in the debate. And these are the guarantee of good jobs in the future, I believe.
and I read some scary stats on this recently, Jacques, that it's a survey of industry leaders across the world, and I think the stat was only 40% of executives in the major companies surveyed believed that their learning and development function made a difference in the organisation.
I agree. Very good point.
Which brings me to the point then, we know the shift is coming. We know, thanks to research from yours and others, that we do have more time than perhaps we thought we did. But nevertheless, we have to create the burning platform, because humans only change when they have to change, not when they want to change. So any tips on how we create the burning platform for ourselves and our organisations?
I think it's pretty... every organisation in Australia, I feel, should, if they're not feeling the burning platform in the need to invest both in their organisational assets and in their people, then they're probably not looking hard enough. You only have to look up at the, the top 6 or 7 companies in the world and who they are and their scale and what they're doing. And if you're not scared of a combination of Amazon, Facebook, Google, then, I mean, every single organisation has to be scared of at least of one of those three organisations. So I know that personally we feel an amazing, and then you add Microsoft, LinkedIn onto that as well. We feel an amazing burning platform to move. We all sit on a mountain of data. We've got great internal capabilities. And here in Australia, most of us have pretty good structural positions. So most of us are in good spots if we move. But if we don't move, it's going to go fast. So I think if you're sitting here going, well, I'm going to be okay, I don't have a burning platform, I think pull up and say, well, what if Amazon entered my industry, or what if Facebook entered my industry, or what if Google entered my industry? Because more than likely, if they're not there, one of those 3 will be there in the next 5 years.
So if you're not scared right now, you're not paying attention.
Exactly.
Can I say that I think the burning platform is when we look at technological disruption in combination with demographic disruption. That is, apart from young people finding it harder to get into the workforce, older people are generally, not always, less digitally literate. We know that whenever organisations downsize, it's older people who are more likely to be made redundant and less likely to find a new job. And there's less time remaining for them to justify investing in training. So we're already worried about our healthcare and our welfare services bills. What if people actually start retiring even earlier and keep living longer? So for me, that is the huge problem that all societies around the world are facing. And what is great in that is that many of the opportunities of digital technology are particularly well suited to older people. The opportunity to work more flexibly, the chance to use that intellectual, social, financial capital you've built over your life in new ways, more efficiently through Airbnb or Uber or whatever you like. And because it's no longer demanding that we're physically incredibly strong to be able to keep working. So for me, the big thing is making sure these older people are confident and skilled and understand what they could do in the future if they happen to lose their safe, secure job in a large organisation.
Thanks, Claire. There was a question over here.
Yeah, hi. On continuing on the trend of demographic implications of this disruption, I guess the question really relates to the geospatial implications of digitisation of the economy. I mean, we had this great debate over the last probably 20 years of digitisation, and it was going to lead to telecommuting, and we're all going to move to the country. But in fact, we've seen the opposite, and we've seen the great urbanisation trend in Australia and around the world. What are the implications of digitisation and automation on the geospatial distribution of population, of trends, and what does that mean for the way we structure our society, and ultimately what does it mean for the future of regional Australia?
So far, all of the major labour market trends, regional Australia is doing less well on. So they're ageing faster, they're not keeping up with the demand for more skilled workers, and it's less clear where their advantage lies. So we've recently completed a project with Jobs Queensland which begins to look at where's the strategic advantage for one specific regional community, considering this idea that some roles are enhanced by technologies and some are displaced. So in that region, they have a really high proportion of retail workers. Those jobs are at high risk. But farm workers, also a large group in the region, are enhanced by digital technology. The sensors tell them when to irrigate and when to fertilise, so they're making better decisions, but they don't replace them. So it's that kind of thinking about where is digital disruption going to create an advantage, and what does this region have that plays to that strength? I think it's going to be a very tailored solution for each region, but you're absolutely right. That is a huge risk that regional Australia continues to keep falling behind.
And no matter how many policies there are around support for housing or to move to regions, actually that is not really seeing any real change, because young people are pouring into cities and will continue to at a very high rate for education, for work, for living. There is no trend that has them going back, even though it's a great Australian dream. that we hold for them. It's not happening.
One more question over here.
Hi, it's Nicolette from Siemens. Glad to listen to you and know that I'm working for one of those top 8 software companies in the world. So coming from Germany, we've had to fight this since the third revolution. So we know where we're going, maybe not 100% clear on how always. I think Michael mentioned something around industry involvement in education, and it's something we as Siemens feel globally very passionate about, and it's changed my role in human resources completely in terms of how we engage. So we've engaged with Swinburne and the national government, Australian government, to set up a pilot apprenticeship for Industry 4.0. And I think this is just something industry just have to stop looking at universities and the government for providing the skills and start getting involved themselves and duplicate those things a lot more. So just a comment, thank you for making that comment, because more industry have to get into that. And then to the broader panel, and I don't know about Claire or maybe Jan, to the topic of diversity, and you've mentioned ageism as one of the diversity components, but personally and also as Siemens, we see a great opportunity in the world of future digitalization also for disabled and females because of the flexibility. I would love to hear the panel's view on that. And last question, Jacques, to you. It's not all about AI. We've not talked about virtual reality and machine learning, so I think it would be nice to hear from your point of view is what are the other things people in the room and board should go dabble in other than just AI to look at what will disrupt them. So just those 2 questions.
Which one would you like answered first?
Ladies first.
Diversity. Okay, so we know that the people who are least likely to be using technology tend to be older, tend to be living alone, are likely to have a disability, have lower levels of education and lower levels of income. But when we look at those people who break the trend, say older people who are using technology in a wide range of ways, they are experiencing just as many benefits from that technology use as the young people. And it's not impossible to get people to make that shift, so we have to ensure that the people who have the most to gain from this technological empowerment are confident and resourced and skilled to be able to do it.
And thank you for the comment about Swinburne. We have a few partnerships with Swinburne. We take on a bunch of IBL students, which are amazing industry-based learning students. We hire more than half of them. And there are great opportunities to partner with universities, and they're one-offs. With Swinburne, we've built what we believe is the world's best working adult education organisation in the world. It overskews, it's got more than 10,000 students now across Australia. It massively overskews female first-in-family education and regional, and it is helping these adults retrain and redeploy. These opportunities are there with universities if we work with them and if we push them, not if we wait for them or not if we wait for government.
We might just pass the last question now, if we may. I'm sorry, we've got 2 out of 3 of your questions.
I believe in you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So we've talked about the adults, and I think I'm one of them, and I know there's very little hope for me. I should just make sure I get my retirement nest nice and ready. But what are we doing to make sure that the school curriculum changes to in view of all the changes that are happening in the workforce with AI and everything else?
Jan, you might have some comments on that.
Well, short answer, not enough.
Yes.
Slightly longer dated answer. There, as I said, there are some good examples in Australia of some schools who have captured the idea of entrepreneurship, captured the idea of different kinds of learning. But I think it's so fundamental what needs to change. As in health, and the fact that we now have a very deep allied health system in this country, which actually offsets major costs. My vision for a future education system is one of allied education. There is a lot more people that could be involved, including industry, and some of the best work actually in Germany, but also in some parts of the US, are universities engaging in primary schools, but also with industry. So this idea that we are partners in this education and learning of young people from the get-go is a new mindset. Number 2 new mindset is that there are many people who are going to be part of a learning journey, and a teacher's job is going to radically change. That position description is done. Chalk and talk is so over. Students have already voted with their feet. They can get anything they need to know from Dr. Google. What they do need is they need curation, they need facilitation, they need coaching, and they need that idea and ability to work with each other. And I'll give you an example. We've run, for the last 3 years, a program we started with NAB, actually, called $20 Boss, which is a program that has all of these skills that we've talked about, enterprise skills of digital, communication, problem solving, collaboration. It's a 1-month program. In that month, you get $20, a real $20, which is why it's called $20 Boss, to set up a venture. And at the end of the month, you pay the $20 back with $1 interest. It is a bank. And anything you make on top of that, you can put into your business, into your community, or into your school. 26,000 students have run at that opportunity of immersive real-world learning. 80% of them joined up with their friends. So they were interested in collaboration. 98% paid the $20 back, a return NAB's never had on any loan, ever. And interestingly, one of the really interesting proof points was teachers saying we didn't feel that we had the financial capability to teach the students financial capability, which is crazy. It's $20, right? So there were so many insights into this one idea, which is a entrepreneurship, the biggest student entrepreneurship program in Australia for students, and with incredible outcomes and results. But it talked to a new way of learning, it talked to teachers having very different roles, and it talked to allied professionals coming and working alongside the students for that entire month. And just to wrap it up before Rob throws me off the stage, my favourite, and I need to tell you this because it speaks to lots of things we've talked about, my favourite venture was 3 young Indigenous boys from a high school called Centralian High. That's not a TV show, it's a real high school in Alice Springs. And these 3 guys, 15 years of age, looked around their school, thought the teachers were looking a bit on the chubster side, and decided to set up a boot camp, and then tracked their teachers using tech about their progress over a month. They kind of guilted the teachers into it, right? At the end of the month, they had taken their business out of school, were using tech to help contribute their teachers' tracking, were still at school, obviously, at 15, and were still doing their outside activities, sport being one of them, because who else would come up with a boot camp idea? But we saw thousands and thousands and thousands of these ideas. So I know that we have a generation with the hearts and minds for this, but do we have an education system, and do we have an industry system that is ready for them?
That's a wonderful note on which to finish our discussion. Thanks, Jan. So thank you very much to all of our panellists. Great contribution. And Jacques, I'm going to toss it to you to finish with the story you told me before this started, which I found terribly optimistic, that this is not a new problem. Apparently the Romans posed a similar issue, and you were telling us about, was it the glass?
Yes.
Would you mind just sharing that story as a finishing note?
Yeah, in fact, the problem of jobs has always been, at a certain time in life, a big problem. And obviously, we all come back into time of 200 years ago when we have to move from agriculture to manufacturing. That's the first one. We all remember that one. The issue of the horse is being replaced by the 4T or whatever it was. By the way, just before going to the story, I want to go back on the education system, because whatever the maths we look, the best return on society we have had in the last 100 years has been education. The ROI, whatever you measure it, it's always 20 to 25%. So we're going to need to continue. And at that time, when we moved from agriculture to manufacturing, if you look back at the US actually poured tons of money in a new education system at that time. And I think it's time to redefine education. We should not bash again the system and say the curriculum is bad, the teachers are not good. I think these are kind of jobs where we should pay these people much better so that they become actually the sponsor of that change. Now, going back to your questions about, is it a new problem that we face? As I said, no, it's an old problem, because we've seen that between manufacturing to services, from agriculture to manufacturing. And at the time of the Roman, obviously the biggest source of jobs. There were only two types of job, pretty much. One was obviously to do what we call what's the name of that, pottery, or
Pottery?
Yes, pottery. And the second one is obviously to go and compete among each other and be the one to survive. So most of the time it was actually killing a lot of people. And in fact, one person actually discovered what you are drinking now with, which is the glass. And at that time, the emperor Nero at that time basically decided to kill that person because of that innovation, simply because they realized that if the people cannot do pottery, in fact, these people will come and create a major social unrest in Roma and will kill the emperor. So the emperor decided to kill the person who did the innovation. Guess what happens? We still have jobs and we still drink in good glasses.
On that note, thank you very much to each and every one of you.